When I say aquatic abyss, what comes to mind? Maybe the depths of the Mariana Trench, millions of liters of water between you and the nearest breath of fresh air. The last rays of sunlight dissipated into the water far above you. Maybe your imagination goes to something a bit more fantastical. Classic stories of maniacal captains hunting impossibly large whales. Or seafarers discovering underwater civilizations that, by all means, shouldn't exist. The ocean is the greatest mystery that planet Earth still obscures from humanity. An otherworldly environment that is bizarrely less well documented than both of our nearest cosmological neighbors. From thalassophobia and abyssal gigantism to reef leviathans and red tides, this video is an exploration into the nightmares hiding in the aquatic abyss that is the ocean. You should know that this video is part 1 of a series that I'm working on. If you want to see the next part, then you can hit subscribe down there, or if you're watching this in the future, there'll be a playlist up here so you can watch them all. You're on a boat. This far out from shore, the sandy seabed you could easily see in the shallows has been completely obscured by thousands and thousands of liters of water, absorbing the sun's rays. It's unsettling to ponder as you peer over the edge of the vessel, but the comfortable safety of the boat prevents that feeling from escalating to fear. The threat of the unknown that's hidden in the deep blue is infinitely terrifying, fueled by limitless imagination to be tentatively reined in with rational thought. It's hardwired in your brain to be scared of deep water in the same way that you're hardwired to be scared of the dark. It's an evolutionary response developed through generations of fables that have hazarded our ancestors against dangers we couldn't quite explain. All across the world, when a fisherman came home to tell the story of, say, the Loch Ness Monster, it wasn't just an excuse for bringing in a bad haul. Such stories were ways to warn others, seafarers or not, of the danger that the water could pose, much like how tales of other mythological creatures functioned to warn of otherwise mundane hazards. Researchers suggest that those fables, shared repeatedly over generations, are a likely source of that primal fear of deep waters. Centuries of horror stories rewiring our brains to fear the water, or rather, what lurks beneath it. I was 12 the first time I felt that primal fear, getting my scuba diving license in Egypt. Sharm el-Sheikh is widely known for its vibrant reefs and wrecks, housed in pleasantly warm waters that are very nice to swim in. That wasn't the Sharm el-Sheikh I got to experience, however. An extreme algae bloom had spread across much of the Arabian Gulf the previous year. While seasonal algae blooms are pretty normal in the region, this particular instance grew out of control and plagued the region for about 12 months. The waters were flooded with hordes of these microorganisms, blocking the sunlight that would feed the aquatic flora, in turn starving the fauna of their food. Not only that, but the algae themselves produce massive amounts of toxic waste as the bloom rapidly grows out of control. This phenomenon is colloquially known as a red tide. You might think the name has a poetic origin, red evoking the image of blood, as this tidal play kills acres and acres of wildlife. But like many things in life, the name is pretty literal, referring to the cloudy red film of algae that grows over the surface of the water. Sharm el-Sheikh's seascape was barren, almost entirely devoid of life. The water was cloudy, not so much that it was hard to navigate, but enough that the middle distance faded into a blue-gray haze. Desolate dunes of sand as far as the eye could see. With very little wildlife to appreciate, most of my time in the water left me staring into the empty haze ahead. But was it empty? Was that something in the distance just barely hidden behind the haze? My imagination jumped to the worst possibilities. Submarines, barracudas, sharks, something worse. The cloudy waters of the crash zone in Subnautica remind me of that experience. With the seabed disrupted by the crash of your research vessel, The waters around the landing site are filled with stirred-up silt that limit your visibility. It's likely one of the first places that the player will be inclined to explore, given its proximity to the safe shallows that you start in, and, well, it's hard to ignore that call to adventure that's been placed on the horizon. But unlike the warm waters of Sharm el-Sheikh, there is definitely something to be scared of in this haze. You're more likely to hear it before you see it. An echoing roar that shudders your little vessel as you skim along the perimeter of the aurora. About as long as 4 buses. Watching a reaper leviathan slowly swim above you is certain to stop your heart for a moment or two. And that terrifying roar isn't just to intimidate, it's also a form of echolocation for the blind predator, meaning that if you can hear it, it probably knows you're there. Swimming past the haze leads you to deeper and deeper waters, which are refreshingly peaceful compared to the tense hunting grounds around the aurora. Swim a little further, however, and you'll find that your tranquil escape is interrupted by a glow penetrating the abyss below you. That glow quickly reveals itself to be the bioluminescence of a ghost leviathan, abandoning its usual depths for an interesting little meal on the surface. Even in the sturdy cockpit of a submarine, creatures of this size are nightmarish to bear witness to. Both the Reaper and Ghost Leviathans evoke the imagery of the classic sea serpent, a creature so widely spread across the mythology of the world that it seems absurd to suggest that such a beast is only fictional. Of course, there's the obvious biblical Leviathan that those two take their name from, but there's also the Greek Scylla, the Norse Jomungand, and all the varied interpretations of the Naga across Asia. These ancient sea serpents were usually described as unfathomably large and often had some sort of association with the creation or destruction of the world. The oldest myth of a sea serpent originates in Mesopotamia, a region that today encompasses Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, and Turkey. The Mesopotamian creation myth Enuma Elish was found on tablets that dated back to around 1700 BCE and describes 2 primordial entities, Abzu and Tiamat, as an endless, chaotic body of water. The two separate, with Abzu becoming freshwater and Tiamat the salty ocean, before birthing a whole host of gods that later wage a war against their primordial parents. Really interesting, fun read, but not the point right now. In the original text, Tiamat's physical embodiment takes 2 forms, one as a woman and the other as a vague monstrosity possessing a singular thigh and a tail. Sounds pretty familiar. That second description bleeds into later stories, leading to Tiamat's serpentine reputation that continues into pop culture today. Just like the leviathans that will happily tear apart your submarine in Subnautica. A submarine that I was obsessed with growing up was that of Captain Nemo in the sci-fi classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. While I read the book as a teenager, my childhood memories are of the 1954 film adaptation. I was enamored with the idea of walking along the seabed with the aquatic life, but I was also too young to think about the part that terrifies me now as an adult to my very core. The idea of weeks or months trapped in a little tin can thousands of meters under the water, the slightest rupture meaning almost instantaneous death. Luckily, I got to experience this fantasy firsthand before I matured enough to comprehend the horrors of it. If you've been to Disneyland in Paris, you might remember the body of water around Space Mountain. Buried beneath that murky puddle is Captain Nemo's Nautilus, featuring an animatronic giant squid and, well, I don't remember much else, honestly. That squid was seared into my brain for ages after that, both as a fascination and as a nightmare. As a 25-year-old, I got to revisit that experience in Tokyo, and I am delighted to report that it brought back the same wonder that I felt as a 7-year-old in Paris. Minus the nightmares, thankfully. Giant cephalopods like the squid that attacks the Nautilus were thought to be a piece of aquatic mythology for the longest time, just like tales of the Loch Ness Monster and other fables. Something a seafarer would conjure in their imagination under the pressure of rough waters and homesickness. Turns out, though, they're not so imaginary. In 1857, Danish zoologist Japte Steenstrup discovered a squid beak washed ashore, but one significantly larger than something that your local seamonger would be cutting out of their usual catch. Throughout the rest of the century, various reports of giant squid, or parts of one, would pop up all over the globe, taking until 2001 to document the first living specimens, a shoal of paralarval giant squid. The big guys start off really little, with the largest of these paralarval giant squid documented at a minuscule 13 millimeters, despite eventually growing to over 1,000 times larger. It wasn't long after that discovery, however, to find out that giant squid aren't even the biggest cephalopods in the sea. While we now have an impressive 700 documented specimens of giant squid, there are only 12 of its larger brother, the colossal squid.
Nobody had ever filmed a living colossal squid.
From the tip of the mantle to the end of the longest tentacle, giant squid have been estimated to be, at most, about 13 meters. Almost that of a large bus. Meanwhile, the largest colossal squid that we have discovered has been just 10 meters. Unimpressive until you consider that the beak of this specimen was significantly smaller than the beaks of other colossal squid that have been found in the stomachs of their primary predators, the sperm whale. The beaks of those hypothetical specimens suggest that a colossal squid could grow to be as large as twice that of the largest specimen we've found so far. It certainly leaves you wondering what other giant creatures are lurking beneath the impenetrable depths. There is a concept in biology known as abyssal gigantism, referring to the tendency for deep-sea creatures to grow significantly larger than their shallower counterparts. From Japanese spider crabs and giant isopods to seven-armed octopus and giant oarfish, the depths of the ocean continue to show us how little we know about the largest part of our home planet. Speaking of oarfish, these long ribbon-like lampreys are a likely candidate for the centuries of sea serpent sightings that were brushed off as fiction or ocean madness. Also known as king of herrings, giant oarfish have been seen to grow as long as 8 meters and as large as 270 kilos. And they've been documented just about everywhere in the world, which might explain how more or less every culture seems to have a story of some serpentine sea creature. Despite their global distribution, giant oarfish are actually extremely rare due to their preference to stick to the mesopelagic zone of the ocean. That's about 1 kilometer below the surface. Before we dive that deep, let's start at the surface, the epipelagic zone. This is where you've still got daylight reaching into the water, and if you were to look up, you'd be able to see the surface rippling above you. That's about 200 meters below the surface, and as the light fades, so does the heat from the sun, with temperatures ranging from a sauna-like 36 degrees in the Persian Gulf to a frigid -2 near the North Pole. Most iconic ocean imagery lives around here. From the friendly clownfish and blue tangs to the intimidating orcas and barracuda. If it's in a Pixar movie, it's probably around here. Dipping a bit lower, we start to see the light dissipate as we descend into the mesopelagic zone, or we can use the fun name, the twilight zone. Home to many less friendly faces that you'll be familiar with, like our giant oarfish, as well as great white sharks and Japanese spider crabs. This is also where Nuno Gomes set the record for deepest dive without a vessel, 280 meters. While it only took him 14 minutes to reach that depth, it took over 12 hours for Gomes to resurface. For those unfamiliar, when scuba diving, your body absorbs more nitrogen from the air in your tank due to the pressure of millions of liters of water compressing your body. Even more fun, atmospheric air actually becomes toxic beyond a certain depth, which is why we have special mixes like nitrox and trimix. If you ascend too quickly, that atmospheric nitrogen bubbles out of your tissues and does some unpleasant stuff. Something that is referred to as decompression sickness, or more colloquially, the bends. Symptoms can be as mild as some achiness or rashes, but as severe as paralysis, seizures, or death. To avoid this, divers take decompression stops as they ascend from the lowest point of their dive. There's a whole table to calculate how long you need to spend at each stop, or you can use a dive computer that does the math for you. As you rest at these stops, you can safely dissipate some of that gas through respiration, back out the way that it came in. For dives as deep as Gomez's record, it was more than just the stops, however. He had swapped out dozens of tanks as he ascended, each of them containing a specific mix appropriate to the depth that he was resting at. But pressurized nitrogen in your blood isn't the only thing that such intense compression can bring. Under that sort of pressure, your nervous system can start to fail. Sometimes as little as some tremors or dizziness, other times as scary as somnolence so strong that you might pass out if you blink for a millisecond too long. If you close your eyes and see complete darkness, that's what you would see in the midnight zone. Past 1,000 meters below the surface, sunlight has completely dissipated. This is where bioluminescence starts to become a more common trait among residents, like the anglerfish in Finding Nemo that haunted my dreams, and probably yours too. Stoplight loose jaws are certainly a sight you'd be unhappy to bump into in the dark, but just because you can't see them doesn't mean that they can't see you. These deep-sea dragonfishes illuminate the water with a red glow that's almost infrared. Their eyes are adjusted to only see this wavelength, so they can spot their prey in the dark without the obvious glow of an anglerfish's fin ray. But thankfully, not everything is so scary down here. I present the Dumbo octopus without further comment. These guys are conveniently located at the same depth as the next stop for our abyssal tour bus, the wreck of the Titanic, and more recently, the Titan. The OceanGate Titan was a tour submersible venturing to explore the set of the James Cameron movie Titanic. On June 18, 2023, the Titan lost contact with their launch ship just 105 minutes into the trip. A remotely operated submersible found various scraps of the Titan just 500 meters from the bow of the Titanic, 3,800 meters below the surface. The chaotic and fragmented state of the Titan implies that the vessel imploded under what would have been 380 times normal atmospheric pressure. Almost definitely, and by God, hopefully, instantaneous death. At the time of recording, the US Coast Guard is currently investigating the incident, so I'll leave the discussion of the OceanGate disaster for another time. The Titan isn't the only doomed vessel I hope to never find myself trapped inside. Even worse is the fictional Iron Lung, a rusty submarine being piloted through an ocean of blood by a convict that's been welded inside. Unlike the Titan or the Nautilus, the Iron Lung has no viewports. Well, none that you can see through. The ocean of blood is so deep and so dense that the glass has been replaced by sheet steel. So even if the glass was still there, you wouldn't be seeing a whole lot out of that window anyway. As you navigate blindly through this hellish ocean, you're tasked with taking pictures at various points, starting off with some skeletons that are littered across the seabed, and then this odd stone that resonates through the blood, and then... Is it scarier to imagine what's out there in the water, or is it scarier to... Just a touch deeper takes us to the abyssal zone, and, well, there's not a lot down here. Unlike the unsettling creatures that reside in the bathic pelagic zone above, the horror of the abyssopelagic zone isn't the residents that would haunt your nightmares. It's the endless abyssal plains that make up a majority of the Earth's surface. Crushed by the immense pressure of immeasurable liters of water, the seabeds found this deep are almost entirely smooth. It's generous to call these plains a wasteland, because there's simply nothing here that's been laid to waste. It's always been this desolate. You can wander these expanses for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers and find nothing at all. Entirely barren, spare for the sporadic hydrothermal vents, volcanic outlets that are the home to the tiniest speck of life down here. It evokes an eerie, surreal feeling that you might get from experiencing a liminal space, but that one's for another chapter. To me, it brings out the same primal fear of the water that we discussed at the start of this journey, wondering what's just beyond this haze. There's another core memory I associate with that primal fear, but it's not in the ocean, or even outdoors at all. In the safety of my childhood home, I sat at my parents' desk and played Minecraft for the first time. After wandering around for a little while, I stopped on a beach and just gazed into the impenetrable depths in front of me. The vibrant blue fades quickly into an opaque darkness, obscuring whatever mysteries could be buried at the bottom of the seabed. The same unknown gripped me, imagination both fascinated and terrified by the possibilities of what could be lurking in the blocky waters. Minecraft was still a novel experience then, and little Josh didn't know what limitations the game had. For all I knew at the time, there was some incomprehensible tentacled creature inhabiting those waters, ready to drown me the moment I wandered just a little bit too far from shore. Imagination fueled by years of mythological sea serpent stories and the real-world giant squid, the pop culture impact of movies like Jaws, and my fascination with extinct beasts like the megalodon. There's nothing quite like the vivid imagination of a child left alone in the dark, pondering the pitch-black water in the block game that wasn't so friendly back then. Minecraft has had that terrifying sense of the unknown neutered in the years since, partially because I poured a gajillion hours into the game and learned that there was, in fact, nothing in the water, but also by design changes. Oceans are no longer this impenetrable wall of darkness in Minecraft, with the new aquatic flora and fauna forcing Mojang to change how the water is shaded to be a bit less intimidating. While Minecraft has had that family-friendly facelift over the last few years, I can't say the same for that primal fear of deep water. Despite years of swimming, scuba diving, snorkeling, the ocean still terrifies me because of both the fantastical horrors like Subnautica and Iron Lung, but also the very unsettling reality that we don't fully understand the aquatic abyss that makes up a majority of our home. More people have touched the surface of the moon than reached even close to the deepest trenches of our oceans. It's rather ironic to refer to those depths as ours, isn't it?